Hello and welcome everyone to a new virtual production we're going to be putting for LaSalle TV called One on One. I'm your host, Tyler Small. Today we are joined by notable alum Justin Daniels. Justin, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tyler.
For any of you that don't know, Justin Daniels graduated LaSalle in 2004, and after that worked as a news reporter for KQ-TV. After that, you kind of rose through the ranks of MLB Network. Now you're an editor/producer, and you are also the owner and executive producer of Clay Monster Productions. So
Yeah,
what a resume there.
I'm representing both here today. I got the shirt for MLB, and I've got my production hat on as well. So
you know how to publicize. I like it. So just kind of a little small talk before we begin. How's your quarantine been going? What have you been doing to try and stay sane indoors?
yeah, I mean, I guess everybody's going through a different process and trying to figure out what to do. For me, it's been staying home, working from home, which has been nice, and then fixing things around the house. I've actually also been trying to maximize my time as best as I can, and I decided that I wanted to learn Spanish. So I'm about 7 or 8 weeks into learning some Spanish. I did a couple of trips, 2 trips last year to Monterrey, Mexico, for work, for baseball. So I was like, you know what? It's something that I wanted to do. It gives me a little bit more knowledge and a little bit more comfort in being able to talk with players and fans in different areas. So I just never really had the time. And now I'm like, all right, well, now I've got the time. So let me see if I can try and learn some Spanish.
Interesting. Good for you. Say 95% of people staying inside are just binging, doing whatnot. So good for you. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, like everybody else, I've watched Netflix. I've gone through tons of TV shows. I'm probably eating not nearly as healthy as I should and not working out as much as I should. But I'm trying to make whatever I can do, to try and be as productive as possible. We fixed the front steps of our house, trying to clean up around the house. So trying to be as productive as you can, but it's at the end of the day, you got to be like, well, this is a unique situation that everybody's kind of learning as we go.
Right. Awesome. Well, we're going to dive right into it. Before we kind of go into how the coronavirus has affected you and how your work has changed, you just mentioned you work from home. Talk about how you got to where you are today and what your normal day-to-day would have been like.
Yeah, I mean, I started with MLB technically in 2005, which was at that point MLB Productions. Kind of worked as a production assistant and logger for a couple of years. Took that 1 year and went to Missouri and worked as an on-air reporter. Came back in 2009, and I was still with Productions in 2009, but it was inside the MLB Network building, which opened up in 2009 in Secaucus. And then kind of from there, just started slowly moving up the ranks to editor, and then associate producer, and then producer. 2015, when the new commissioner took over, we all got merged underneath the MLB Network, so that's why I'm technically now an MLB Network employee, and just kind of been moving through the ranks from then. Actually, a year or so after that, we also acquired the rights to NHL Network, and NHL.com, so I get to do a little NHL stuff as well. And then for my daily, what my normal, I wouldn't even call it a daily thing because I'm always changing things. I'm one of the most all over the place people at that office. So I would say my yearly thing is there are plenty of times where I'm at the office editing, whether it's working on promos, whether it's working on certain clip reels for sending out to sponsorships to kind of pitch ideas or pitch money, or whether it's something for the league office so that they can use for their own community development. Or I could be shooting camera. There are times where I go out on field shoots, especially certain events like RBI World Series, which is a youth baseball tournament in August. It happens, it's about 14 to 18-year-olds. They come into this tournament, and that'll be something that I'll shoot during the time. And then there'll be other segments during the year where I'll need to be shooting. I'm kind of like a jack of all trades. And then on top of all that, I produce certain things. There's a handful of things that maybe I'm editing, producing, and shooting all by myself, and they just let me do it as a one-man band. But the biggest thing is, for me, it's been a mixture of things, and I'll travel, I'll be at home, I'll be back and forth. But I would say last year I traveled probably about 13 or 14 times, probably about for a total of 2 months of the year. Obviously, they're not 2 months strung together, but, it'll be a week here, 3 days there, 2 weeks here. And when you talk about all the things that have changed for me, that's probably the biggest one that has made a difference, because right now I'm still getting to edit from home. So that's kind of been a lucky thing, where I used to have to go into the office to edit, and they've kind of opened things up. But I'm still editing at points, and there's still certain points where I'm leading an edit or I'm the producer of an edit. So I'm editing it and producing it and going through my boss. But the biggest change for me is, as you can imagine, pretty much since March, travel has just been eliminated.
Yeah, for sure. So good that you still get to get your hands kind of into it, do what you somewhat will be doing if you're in the office. But obviously the elephant in the room here is baseball was supposed to start 2 months ago, and opening day, a lot of festivities were supposed to happen within this time. How has that been? How has it been still trying to put on 24 hours of production for MLB Network on TV?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when things first started happening, it was back in March. I was actually working on a project for NHL at the time. We were doing NHL works with the USA Hockey, and USA Hockey puts on a Patty Kazmaier Award, which is kind of similar to like the Heisman for women's hockey, for college women's hockey. So we were doing a project at that time, and we were just kind of finishing up. And then we were just going to get slowly moving into the season, into the baseball season, setting up promos, setting up marketing and advertising. Jackie Robinson Day comes around April 15th. So sometimes we set up certain videos that will play in the scoreboards at the stadium. So it was going to be a lull point anyway in terms of travel, in terms of doing things. But it really became interesting watching everybody else around me, because first it became, all right, well, don't go in unless you have to. And then it became, don't go in at all. And we started trying to figure out how we can work. A handful of us, myself and a couple other people in my department, had come from MLB Productions, where we were really used to working from drives and working locally and working from home, and being able to edit long form stories from home. So for us, it wasn't that difficult. I had a drive that I was able to do some work from. We finished up the Patty Kazmaier Award from home. We just kind of grabbed a couple of things my last time in the office and put them on a drive, and we worked from home. And then from there, it was a matter of trying to figure out what was the next project. And we're trying to just buy time, because we don't know how long this is going to last. You don't know how long it's going to be before we have baseball again, or for that matter, before we have production in TV again. Because at a certain point, it was probably around the second to last week, or maybe the last week in March, where they just kind of told everybody to not show up to the office, which meant on-air talent as well. So we just kind of were producing MLB Network and NHL Network. We're just throwing up old TV shows and old games and old movies, and just kind of biding the time there. And it wasn't that big of a deal, because, I mean, NHL was on pause, so there's no live games going on. MLB hadn't gotten up to their live programming really yet anyway, with the exception of a few spring training things. So it was just filling time for them. And then, we're just trying to figure out what the next step is. So I'm watching this, and you're saying, okay, now there's no talent in the building, and there's no this, and how are they doing this, and how long is this going to last? And what they started doing is, as you can see here, what we're doing is we started doing Zoom meetings or Zoom, kind of conference calls, where they would have the 2 or 3 talent set up on a Zoom, and maybe they would try and call in a player, call in a coach, and maybe the show wouldn't now be a half an hour or an hour long. Maybe the show would be 12 minutes long. It would be whatever it was, and you didn't have to worry about commercials. There was no commercials that were coming in and out. You didn't have to really worry about a whole set. A lot of the reporters that we have, maybe not necessarily the on-air lead anchors, but a lot of the reporters that we have probably have a home setup in some way, shape, or form, because we've already prepared them for that. People like Ken Rosenthal, JP Morosi, some of those guys are, Kevin Millar, some of those guys already have a home setup anyway, because if we're working and doing things throughout the year, they might not have time to come into the office, come into, Secaucus. So they're already kind of prepared with some of this. Some of the anchors might have had to kind of step up a game a little bit and get prepared. But then after a while, after a week or two, you start seeing a figuring out of how this is going to work. And we're going to do some Zoom meetings and Zoom interviews and Zoom conference calls and work through that. And I think it took about 2 to 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden you start seeing, all right, now we're going to get sponsorships on top of those things. And some of that sponsorship stuff is really where the money comes in from, because we'll have regular shows, MLB Tonight, sponsored by a certain, sponsored by Gatorade, sponsored by, T-Mobile, whatever it is. And then the next thing you know, that's where some of that money comes in. So it took a couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden you start getting that sponsorship coming in. So they would set up a Zoom meeting. You'd see almost in like 4 boxes, you'd get your play-by-play person or your lead anchor, then your analyst person, and then maybe an interview. And then in that last 4th corner, you'd either see the logo of the show or the sponsorship for the show. So that's where they would, try and get their sponsorships in there. And again, it would probably be about a 12 to 15 minute thing. And in terms of live, that's how they handled things for a good while. But of course, on top of that, you've also got, MLB has got literally 100 years. And at least in video sense, 60, 70 years of games. So, we would air old games, the 1960 World Series, Game 7. And for some people, that was something that was enjoyable. You haven't seen it in a long time. During the week, you would set up games based on a certain day of the week. Wednesday would be what we called walk-off Wednesday. So games would always be walk-off winners or games that ended with a walk-off home run or something. So that would be on a Wednesday. Or a Sunday, maybe it was Yogi Berra's birthday. So they'd play all the Yogi Berra games and stuff like that. So for MLB, it's kind of nice because we have such a huge archive of stuff that we can already throw up there. And then if you just tack it in with a few 20-minute Zoom productions that are put together, and those productions can kind of cover you through the news of the day, like what's going on, how close are we to an agreement, and that kind of gets you through. And then, on top of all that, it's figuring out what other things we can do to be creative. For myself, the last month and a half, I've kind of been involved in this thing called the Dream Bracket, which is based on the out of the park video game simulation. And we've been kind of basically having these simulations built where teams are playing each other, and we've got our own 2 analysts doing a play-by-play on it, which is kind of cool. So you'll see Scott Braun will be the lead play-by-play, and JP Morosi will be the color analyst, and they're watching these games. And the first bracket that we set up a month ago was basically took every team, say like the New York Yankees, and then you break that team down into, they've got Jeter on the team, they've got Babe Ruth on the team, they've got Whitey Ford on the team. So it wasn't just the Yankees of this one year. It was the best Yankees of all time, the best Phillies of all time. And then we kind of put these things together, and we aired it out on Twitch. It went out on MLB Network. It went out on MLB.com, on our social sites. So I think for us, without having baseball, again, we've got the archiving, which has been a big deal, tons of games. We got some of the Zoom meetings going on, and then we've got documentaries that we have. And then on top of that, trying to figure out what is still going on, which again has been those video games. And you see ESPN and some of the other sites, they're playing those video games, whether the players are playing them themselves, or in this case, what I was talking about, you got guys that are just doing a play-by-play of a simulation. You're just trying to use whatever you can, where you can still work from home. You're still talking about sport-esque type of things, but doing it in a completely brand new, different way.
Yeah, no, I mean, that really is great. They've put out a lot of content. I think the number one thing has been those classic games. I know personally, I've gone back and watched through all the World Series just because I'm so starved for baseball and sports. But kind of the next question will be, you've been doing a lot of these different things, but everyone always says, like air quotes, when things go back to normal, if and when they ever do. Do you see anything that you've done from this stretch that you think will stay in the long run, like a change that will stay for years to come, whether it be the video game tournaments, whether it's a show or the dynasty games that you were talking about, or anything, even if it is more of like a smaller production kind of thing? Do you see anything kind of sticking?
Yeah, I mean, for us, MLB has always aired classic, archive games. So I think that's going to continue going. And that it's something that we did before coronavirus happened. It's something that's going to go after. I think the biggest thing that's probably that we've been dealing with that's going to stay around, and it's something that actually I've talked about with my wife. She works in insurance, is this work from home policy. For a lot of us, people who were editing, and we're not talking about producers, you're not talking about people who are going on the road, but people who were editing had to come into the office and edit. And it was just the way that the system was built. We've got all that baseball archive footage, like I said, and it's built into a system where once you're on a computer, you can be at any computer in the office and access all of these games. But once you're outside of the office, you can't really access them, at least not to edit. I mean, you can access them and maybe you can look at a clip, but you can't really edit with them. And then they start building a way for us to do that on a live side version. So not just I can put things onto a hard drive and go home and work from home, but now we can actually go into the system. And so we were just talking about it this week with my department. You know, a lot of us are now going to be able to work from home for a certain period of time. Now, could it be a certain point where they ask us to start coming back in? Yeah, and there's going to be, you know, people that want to, our bosses or whatever, going to want to watch over what we're doing, or it's going to be easier to kind of go into the office to work on certain projects. But I think this opens up the ability for a lot of people to work from home. And like I said, my wife is doing it where, you know, she had an insurance company and they're talking about, you know, 70, 80 people, and they would all go into the office, and maybe a handful of people, 3 or 4, would be able to work from home on a certain day or a specific day. It would request, hey, can I work from home? And now they're walking into a policy where everybody's working from home minus a handful of people that have to go into the office, or everybody's going to be able to work from home 3 days a week or whatever it is. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing. And once that box is opened, it's tough to really close it. I mean, we're moving into such a digital era where we have been in the last 20 years, but even more so now where you're starting to get to that access where now we can do these things. And it's going to be tough to tell people that they can't do them anymore. It was one thing when it was like, all right, it's tough to edit from home if you don't have a system or you don't have the access to the footage. Well, now we found a way to do these things because it was something that we had to do to maintain business, to keep people working, to keep things moving. And so I think that's the biggest thing in terms of a TV production side. From a baseball side, the thing that I'm probably really curious about is, I mean, even before they shut everything down, they turned away the clubhouses for players to be able to be interviewed by, you know, certain reporters. I'm really curious to see how that evolves because there's always been a give and take, a feel of you're going into their personal space. And there's been times where it's like, it's been locked off. Like you can only go in for this 45 minutes and this is where you're allowed to go and talk to the players in the locker rooms before the game or after the game. And now, you know, with everything going on, it's not going to happen for the rest of this year. Guarantee you that. But 2021, 22, at what point do they start allowing that? Or does that thing just never happen ever again? And the only way that you can get post-game sound from somebody is they're going to have to bring out, you know, the players into the press conference room and literally go through one at a time, which you can do it. It just takes a long time. I mean, part of the reason why they open up the press conference room for players is, or for reporters is, you know, not every reporter needs to talk to every single player. And some reporters, you know, are just talking to the Spanish players or are just talking to the home team or the away team. And, you know, to be able to do multiple at once kind of cuts everybody down. So you're only sitting there for an extra 45 minutes if you're a player, if you're a PR rep there, so you can kind of get out. But if you're now having to go through and bring in players in a line, one by one by one, is there going to be a cap on, oh, we're only bringing in 3 players and a coach? Or is it going to be, all right, we're just going to keep on bringing guys in until you tell us you don't need anybody else? What's that line? So that's going to be the really curious part for me. And then even too, you know, you're talking about some of the stuff that I deal with, some of the stuff that I go on the road is these large fan-based social things. I mean, All-Star is the biggest event, I will tell you, is the biggest event for MLB, bar none. It's not close. Everybody thinks about World Series, but World Series, you don't know where the location is until the week before, and it's at a certain point of the year where it's a little bit colder. You know, you're talking about middle of the summer, there's no basketball, there's no football, there's no hockey, and All-Star's got its own stage. Literally, the only day that there's no MLB or no, like, American sports is the day after the All-Star game, where there's nothing playing. That is the only day in all of the 365 calendar where there's no sports. So it shows you, like, on that day that there is the All-Star game, all the eyes are there. And then you've got Fan Fest, you've got all these other sponsorship and corporate events. So you can't have that with this a mass amount of people that need to be there and then having a situation like this. So, when does that type of thing come back? I mean, I think that is one of those things that will come back once we get to that point. But for now, it is something that is a real curious part, because that's where a lot of money comes in and where a lot of the eyes come in. And that's just not going to happen, these large social events, and that's what sports is kind of ingrained on, right?
Oh, 100%. I mean, players have outspoken in any sport that they don't know how it'll be without fans in the stands, or whether it is the media aspect. You do raise a lot of questions for America's pastime. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I remember 2000, I think it was 2015. There was one game, the Orioles versus the White Sox, that was played without fans because of the riots that were happening in Baltimore. And I remember watching it and being at the office, and we talked about it. And it was interesting for us because you're thinking about, all right, there's no fans there, but baseball players, I mean, sports and athletes in general, but baseball players especially, are weird, superstitious people.
Mm-hmm.
And, you'd have guys going up to the plate and they would talk, they would have their music playing as they're walking up to the plate. There's nobody there. They've got an in-game announcer talking, now up to the plate, this person. There's no fans in the stands that could care about the music. Or you'd see a couple of guys that were having fun with it and joking around with it, where the normal thing after an inning's over, you walk to the dugout and fans will be like, oh, toss me the ball. And, there's no fans there. But every once in a while, guys would joke around and toss the ball up to the fans as if there were fans in the stand, and the ball would just sit in the stadium. So, I mean, it was a fun point at that time. But it'll be different. It'll be interesting to see what happens without fans in a stadium. But I think, for a lot of these guys, they're not that far removed from playing in high school and college. I mean, yeah, some of those veterans that are 35 years old, but even some of them, I mean, let's be honest. If you're a team if you've ever played in Miami or, in Montreal right before they closed, a handful of those stadiums are only putting up 1,000 or 2,000 people. So it's not like you're going to get a whole roar of the crowd anyway at some of those places. So for some of the teams or some of the players, it'll be a little weird. But again, for some of those guys, it's like, all right, they've just got a job to do. A guy like Clayton Kershaw, he doesn't care who fans are in the stands when he's pitching. He's zoned in. He's locked in. Albert Pujols is up to the plate. He doesn't care who's watching the game. He's zoned in and locked in on that ball. So I think once the game is into it, guys aren't going to think about it. The pomp and circumstance will be a little bit different. There'll be less of the extracurriculars that go on. The game might actually be a little bit faster because there's not some of the other things that go on. But yeah, I mean, I think at the end of it, guys are playing a game. These are competitive athletes, serious, they work hard. They are very focused in their game. So I think once they're into the game, they won't care about it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, I always just look at how the playoffs are going to look, because, I mean, the beginning of the season, regular season, is going to look like the dog days of August for a team that's under 500 maybe. But playoffs will be interesting. Before Tanya yells at me, I'm going to get us back on track to the to the media side of this, even though I could talk to you about the baseball side of it for hours. Here's the last question I'll have for you. This is going to be going out for mostly college students on a college station. A lot of them want to go into a field like you, including myself. So we always ask what type of skills or what you learned from LaSalle went into your normal day-to-day. What type of skills do you think helped you most in this pandemic, in the weirdness of this all?
I mean, when you're talking about the skills, I'll go back to talking about the skills that I learned at LaSalle that kind of brought me into, working with MLB or working anywhere, similar skills that are helping me through this. I remember when I was working with the LaSalle TV and worked on a couple of shows, Sports Talk Philadelphia. And when I was a freshman, I was able to get my hands on equipment right away. And when I was able to work on and touch the equipment. And I remember Matt York, who was the producer at the time, allowed me to come in and learn editing. So before I even took an editing class, which I actually didn't even take at LaSalle until my senior year, I learned how to edit nonlinear editing my freshman, sophomore year. And those types of things helps me advance, because once you start learning how to edit and you learn how, story making works and what shots work and what shots don't work, those types of things kind of help me increase to the point where when I got a job with MLB, my first job was as a logger, but I was able to help and move up to being a production assistant faster, because I was able to understand how editing works, or why they needed certain shots, or what they were looking for, and just kind of understanding the medium in general. And in the same sense, you talk about that with this, pandemic going on and being able to work from home, my ability to work from home and my ability to be able to edit is a big deal. I mean, I'm a producer editor, but if I were just a producer, man, it would be a whole lot more difficult, because you've just got to come up with creative ideas in an area where you don't have a whole lot of options. But having all these extra skill sets, being able to edit, being able to do other things, has allowed me to be able to work from home and continue to work from home, and feel confident that, I still will have work. Going through the pandemic, things that I am dealing with now, I don't think are much different from me. Like, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of different things that I'm learning in the pandemic now, at least in terms of TV and media. Spanish, maybe, like I said, hopefully if I can learn my Spanish and take that with me into, working with players and going to different cities, that'll help. And that's, again, partly why I'm doing that. But as an editor, I'm still learning the same things. I'm still working with the same stuff. Maybe the use of working with video games has been a little bit different. The use of Zoom meetings, because, sometimes we used to be able to just want to go out to a place and just do an interview in a location. And now we're learning, hey, we can do Zoom meeting interviews, and that can be a thing. Not saying it's the highest production quality level, and it does take a little bit of producing skills to know how to teach somebody to set up a Zoom meeting, right? Because some people will have their Zoom meeting where they're all the way back here and they're over here. And so there does take a little bit of production level where you're kind of teaching somebody how to stand and how to sit and how to frame themselves, because you're not able to be there on site. But, a lot of this stuff is very similar. It's just a little growing learning about the Zoom itself. And maybe there is an option for, if we get into a bind and like, hey, we really need this soundbite, but we can't afford to fly all the way out to Colorado to interview this person. Hey, is there a way, now that everybody's, not just us, not just as TV people, but everybody else is a little bit more accustomed to Zoom, it does maybe open up that option for us. So in terms of a learning curve, maybe it's both for us and for other people to know that Zoom might now be an option, to get interviews if and when we need them on a random basis like this. Again, it's not going to be the same production quality level, but as you see with social media and some other things, sometimes it's not always about the highest quality of production. Sometimes it's just about getting different content, new content, and finding more ways to get it on, finding more ways to get it to air and get it to show, because no matter how great the product is, if it doesn't run, if it doesn't show, it doesn't matter.
All right. Well, great. I mean, that's a lot of great insight you can give to students. Justin, I thank you for the time and for sitting down via Zoom. Hopefully soon we can get baseball back. Hopefully soon you can get back to your job. Yeah, you're a good editor, you're a good producer, but your main job there is really giving great tours of MLB Network to students.
Yeah, I mean, for me, just as much as anything else, I love being at the stadium. I love being on the field, being at the arena, and being able to travel. I mean, travel is one of those huge blessings that I didn't even really realize when I was kind of jumping into this field. But to be able to travel as much as I do, it's allowed me to see not just different stadiums in different places, but like just different parts of the country, different countries for that matter. So I'm looking forward to a point where we can kind of get back to that, and I can get back to traveling to different places. And if nothing else, just getting back to that point where you're on a field, standing on that grass, and you can just smell it and you can feel it. And that excitement that, as a former baseball player myself, as somebody who just loves the game, there are a few things that ever match that.
Well, great. Well, hopefully we can get you back to that soon. Justin, thanks again and stay safe.
Thanks. You too, Tyler.